because the topic that we're going to talk about today is focused and really assumes that you do have Office 365. Now, if you don't have Office 365 already, don't worry. This will actually kind of encourage you to look at that as a possibility. We're actually finding, again, I work for Pragmatic Works, but we're finding as we engage with customers that more and more and more of our customers are starting to look at Office 365 as a viable option for their Office implementation, as well as Exchange, and as well as some BI features that we're going to talk about today. Now, before I go in, I'll mention one more thing about the Office 365. Now, the tough thing about going with Office 365 is it's really more of a larger organization decision rather than just an IT decision, because Office, as you obviously know, impacts a lot of people. It doesn't just impact IT, it impacts a lot of different departments. So what we're actually seeing in the field in consulting is that as licensing agreements or as agreements with Microsoft are coming up for moving over to Office, is that folks are starting to do Office 365. Now, Office 365 is a cloud version of Office. Really, most people that have it, most non-techies, don't even realize they have Office 365 because it looks exactly the same as what traditional Office looks like. Although, because it is cloud, I get updates more frequently than other people do, than traditional Office users get. I get updates very, very frequent. I get patches. I get also additional features added in that folks that have on-premise Office do not get, and you'll actually see some examples of that here today. So consider that as your company is looking at renewing agreements with Microsoft, especially on the Office side, that the Office 365 suite of tools is really very much like traditional Office, but it's going to give them more frequent updates, and it's also going to give them some additional BI features that they might not already have. And that's what we're going to look at today, is some features that are in Power BI. One called here that we're going to talk about is called Q&A, and it is specific to folks that have Office 365 and Power BI. So we'll kind of talk about that and what that means here as we go. Just a little introduction to myself. You see my contact information here. My name is Devin Knight. You can reach out to me via email or Twitter there as well. A little bit about myself. I'm the training director here at Pragmatic Works, so I run really all things training, even including the free training that we do. I work with our marketing team on acquiring speakers and figuring out topics and things like that. I'm also a SQL Server MVP, and I've written several SQL Server books. So I've written some books even as recent as a SQL Server 2014 release book for SSIS. I also run a local user group in Jacksonville where we actually do a monthly meeting. And I blog at a website called BIDN.com. That's the Business Intelligence Development Network.com. Now, again, our focus for today is all about Power BI, and specifically Power BI, one in particular feature called Q&A. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The Q&A stands for question and answer. But we're going to kind of dive into using Q&A, and we'll also dive in how to make a Power Pivot model really optimized for Q&A. So we'll talk about a few of those things as well. So first, though, I want to do some level setting, make sure everyone understands what's involved with Power BI, what components are inside Power BI, how does Q&A fit into that, and really kind of an overall view of what Power BI is. That'll be a short little discussion, and then we'll get into some demos. We'll talk about Power BI Sites, which is a special site that you have available to you, and we'll also get into the specific topic of today, which is Power BI Q&A. We'll spend most of our time on that, of course. All right. So let's talk about Power BI at a high level here and just kind of get an understanding of, first of all, what is Power BI, what does it entail, what features are available in it, and what tools do I have available. So the graphic that you're seeing on my screen right now is showing at a high level what the different types of activities are that you do with Power BI. So you see data extraction, data modeling, data visualization, and collaboration. So data extraction being I'm going to take data out of some kind of a data source, whether it's a database or whether it's a file that I have somewhere or just data that's on the internet. I'm going to pull that data in to a more of a self-service solution. Power BI is all about self-service BI and being able to produce BI solutions without necessarily having to engage with IT at every step of the way. So there's a data extraction step, getting data into a self-service environment, which is typically going to be Excel. Then once you pull that data in, using one of the two tools you see listed here, Power Pivot or Power Query, once you get that data in, you'll then use data modeling step through Power Pivots to be able to make sense of that data. Okay, so the data extraction step is pull data in. It doesn't necessarily have to completely make sense at that point, but we're going to pull data in, and then we're going to use a data modeling step to actually make sense of the data, or create relationships with the different objects that we have. So data extraction, pull data in. Data modeling, create relationships between those multiple data sources that we pull in. Also in that data modeling step, we'll do things like hierarchies and relationships and calculations and all kinds of things that will help our users be able to create their own reports. Then finally we have the data or I shouldn't say finally, but next we'll have the data visualization step. And that data visualization step is taking what we did in the data modeling and being able to put some kind of a front end on top of it, or a visualization that helps my users be able to interact with the data. That can be done through a couple ways. It could be just regular Excel pivot tables, which I don't have listed there. It could also be done through tools like Power View or Power Map. Power View being a very ad hoc reporting tool that allows your users to interact and explore the data, and Power Map, as the name implies, being more of a mapping tool to allow you to take geographical data and visualize it on a 3D map. Then finally, the last step here, which is really our focus of today, is the collaboration step. The collaboration step here is taking the data that from the previous three elements, so data extraction, data modeling, data visualization, and that collaboration step is really sharing it with others. And that sharing with others can be done through tools like the Power BI sites, which we'll take a look at here in a few moments. It can also be done through Power BI Q&A, which is the main focus of our webinar. And then also, which is not our discussion for today, but we can talk about it briefly if we have a little extra time, is Power BI mobile BI apps. So there's actually a mobile BI app for Windows tablets. So I'm actually running a Windows 8 device that we're looking at right now. And there is a Power BI app for Windows 8. And there's soon to be a Power BI app for Apple devices as well. So if you have, most executives love their iPads. So if you have executives that love iPads, don't worry, there's a Power BI app coming for iPad soon. So they're in development of that right now. So in this collaboration step, though, we're going to take what we've developed, like I mentioned in the previous three steps, and we want to share it with others. And we do that through a Power BI site. So we take those previous three steps where we brought the data together, we visualized it, we then deploy that result to a Power BI site. Now a Power BI site is very similar to like a SharePoint Online site. So again, if you're not familiar with SharePoint Online, this is basically like the Office 365 version of SharePoint. It's a cloud version of SharePoint. Nothing is managed or stored on servers on site with you. It's all done in the cloud. And those Power BI sites allow you to deploy and share with others very easily. It also gives you some additional functionality. The Power BI sites allow you to manage things like data refreshes that you have in those Power Pivot workbooks, as well as be able to enable the feature called Q&A, which is, again, our focus of today. Once that information is out in the Power BI site, it can also be shared through the mobile app. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about that Power BI site and really what that's getting for you here. So I mentioned that's under a collaboration step. Really, the main goal there is to be able to share it with others. I've created this great solution in Power BI and Excel, but when it's in Excel, I'm the only one that can use it. So I want to get it to a place where I can share it with others, and that's all done through the Power BI site. I'll take my Excel workbook, deploy that workbook up into my Power BI site, and then once it's deployed to my Power BI site, I can then share it with others very easily just by giving them permission or access to my Power BI site. And I could also do things like schedule data refreshes. So I want to make sure that the data that they're looking at is always the most up-to-date version of the data. So when I upload it or deploy it to my Power BI site, I can enable and schedule data refreshes. So my Power Pivot workbooks that have taken all that data in can automatically refresh daily, for example. I can also, once I've deployed to that Power BI site, enable a feature called Q&A, and we've mentioned this a couple times briefly now. And once I've enabled that Q&A feature on a workbook, I can then really interact with that data at the most granular user you have. In fact, if you have a user that understands how to work in a search engine, if they don't understand how to work in Bing or Google or whatever the preference is of the user for search engine, if they understand how to interact with a search bar, then they can do Power BI Q&A, but they're doing it against their data. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about Power BI Q&A. Before I leave this slide, though, let me mention this. If you're doing on-premise SharePoint, You can certainly deploy Excel workbooks that have Power Pivot and Power Query into an on-premise version of SharePoint. However, the things that you're missing are the Q&A feature that we're focused on today. You do have data refreshes, so you can refresh data if you have an on-premise version of SharePoint, but you will not be able to do the Q&A feature that we're focused on. Okay, just want to make sure I point that out. You can do a lot of these things if you don't have Office 365, but Q&A is not one of them. You have to have Office 365 and Power BI enabled to do Q&A. All right, so let's talk about Q&A. All right, so Q&A is really an awesome experience. Like I mentioned, it's for the lowest granularity of your users. If you have users that know how to use a search engine, then they can interact with your data. They don't have to know how to do pivot tables. They don't need to know how to query a database. All they need to do is know how to type in English a question of their data. And that uses what's called the natural query language to return back results. So they go to what looks like basically like a search engine, type in a question of their data, and it returns back an answer. That's where the name Q&A comes from. You provide a question, it provides an answer. And it's made very simple. It even applies different types of visualizations to the data for you, depending on what types of data you've selected or you've queried. Now, to make this work, to make Q&A work, it involves a little bit on your Power Pivot model. Okay, so first of all, you have to deploy a Power Pivot model to the Power BI site, and then you have to enable that Power BI or Power Pivot workbook on your Power BI site to be enabled for Q&A. So there's a little box that you check, and it enables Q&A on that workbook. It's actually very easy to do. Then once you've deployed and enabled it for Q&A, you'll find that you may not get the results back immediately that you want. So for example, if I deploy out a workbook to my Power BI site that has election data in it, for example. So Brian Knight did a webinar yesterday on Power Pivot, and he based his Power Pivot model off of election data. Okay, if you didn't see that, you should be able to catch the recording. It's probably going to be up today if it's not already. So that recording will show you how to do a basic Power Pivot model. We're not going to focus too much on Power Pivot today because we covered a webinar on that yesterday. You're welcome to catch up on the recording of that. But once you've done that Power Pivot workbook, you've deployed it to your Power BI site, and you begin to ask questions of your data, you may find that you don't get back the immediate results that you would expect. And the reason that is because as developers of Power Pivot, it could even be a power user that develops a Power Pivot workbook, we oftentimes leave the names of our columns something that's very techy. For example, let's say you work with an SAP data source. Okay, I'm not sure if there's anybody on the webinar today that works with SAP, but if you do, then you realize SAP is actually formed off of a German database. It's a German company. It's all, or at least it was originally, it's all German column names, and really unusual column names that you almost have to have a specialist in SAP to be able to manage it. Well, if I were to bring in those column names exactly like they were from SAP, they're really unusual column names, or maybe even from DB2, usually those column names aren't exactly how a user is going to type a question. Okay, so they might type in, show me all the sales. If they were to ask that, I probably don't have a column name called sales inside my Power Pivot model, or I may not. Just depending on how you've designed it. If I don't have a column called sales in my Power Pivot model, then it's not going to return any results, and it'll be confused. But what you have available to you inside of Power Pivot is something called synonyms. And what synonyms allow you to do is create, just like it sounds, a synonym for your column name. So you may call a column name sales amount inside of your Power Pivot model, but whenever someone uses Q&A, they're just going to say, how many sales did I have? And so to help your users be able to search that data or search your model a lot easier, you'll create what's called synonyms here. Oh, did I lose my audio for a minute?
Yeah, Devin, you just lost it for a moment, but you're back.
Okay. All right, so that synonym feature will allow you to, in case I missed that, I'll repeat that for just a moment here. Synonyms basically allow you to create exactly what it sounds like, synonyms for your column names. So as a user types in, show me all the sales, if it's actually a column called sales amount, because you've created a synonym on that column, it'll be able to interpret that as the appropriate column. Okay, so we'll kind of talk about that and talk about how you can tune your models to work better with the natural query language, and that's done through synonyms. Okay, That's one of the things you can do. There's actually a lot of ways you can tune your model or optimize your model for Q&A, and we'll talk about those as we get into demos here actually right now. All right, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you what a Power BI site deployment looks like. So I'm going to deploy a workbook to a Power BI site. Okay. You'll notice it's going to look very similar to SharePoint. So let me pull up my Power BI site here. All right, so this is my Power BI site. It has a lot of sample data sets out here. You'll see the World Bank indicators and Olympic data is out here. These are sample data sets. And I want to be able to deploy a new data set out here, which is one that I've created called the election data. Again, you may have seen a webinar yesterday, and again, if you haven't, you can go back and watch it. They're recorded, where Brian and I created a Power Pivot workbook based off of election data. Okay, so I'm going to do a similar example. I'm going to take what Brian developed yesterday, or take any, it could be any Power Pivot model, that I have, and I'm going to come to my Power BI site. Now again, Power BI, the site, is part of Office 365. And you'll notice it looks very similar to SharePoint in a web browser because that's basically what it is. It's an app on SharePoint. So it's an application in SharePoint. Now, once I have a Power BI site, and we'll probably have to we'll do a webinar later about provisioning a Power BI site. It's actually very simple to do. But once I have a Power BI site, I'm going to come down at the very bottom, and you'll notice here a section where I can add in a document. Okay, so this is basically where I would go when I want to upload a workbook. Okay. All right, so I'm going to hit Add next to my Power BI site, add my documents here, and I'll tell it I want to upload a file. Now, I could do this directly from Excel. I could go to Excel and actually tell it that I want to import from Excel or save as and point to my Power BI site. Either way is fine. I'll hit Browse, and I'm going to go find the location where I have my file that I want to upload to my Power BI site. Now, I have a pre-prepared Power Pivot workbook. We're not focused on Power Pivot today. We're more focused on Q&A. So I'm going to go find this election data set that I have and go ahead and select that and hit OK. Now what this is going to do is it's going to upload my Power Pivot workbook into SharePoint, into my Power BI site, and you'll see that election data one here says a few seconds ago was added. You'll see it's now spinning here. It's trying to upload this now. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and enable it. If you hit the little ellipses here next to the newly uploaded workbook, you'll see here that I have the option where I can add to Power Query. There's a little box here next to the ellipses that says Add to Power Query. If I click that Add to Power Query, it's just as simple as that. I've now taken a workbook I've developed and enabled it for Power Query, Power BI Q&A. So I've enabled Q&A on this workbook, and it was just a simple drop down and hit Enable Q&A. You can see you can also remove from Q&A, and there's also an option here for scheduling a data refresh. So I can schedule a data refresh on this workbook so that it automatically gets updated once a day, okay, or whatever frequency you want. Okay, so we've uploaded this workbook into my Power BI site. Let's show some things that we can do with this now. Just by simply creating a Power Pivot workbook, uploading it to SharePoint, I can now come up to the very top here, and you'll see there's an option here called Search with Power BI Q&A. And if I come up to that section and select Search with Power BI Q&A, it'll bring me to a new page here where it basically is a search engine, like we mentioned earlier. I can come up to the very top here and type in any question that I want of my data, and it will return back results for me. So, for example, if I search something like show political parties, okay, if I type show political parties, you'll notice that it gives me a list of all my political parties. And it just like it would in a search engine, I typed in the results in the bottom, hit enter, and it returns back, I typed in my query at the top, and it returned back the results in the bottom. And it was all through a simple little search bar here where it's very easy to type. Now one thing you'll notice here on the far right is that it's bringing the results back from this workbook called election data. Okay, so it's specifically pulling back the results from an election data workbook, and that's the one that we just uploaded a few moments ago. If I change the type of question that I ask, so say for example if I say how many medals did the United States win? So I changed my query here this time. Rather than asking about political parties, I asked about Olympics data. How many medals in the United States, how many medals did I should say, did the United States win? And I get a result immediately here of the count of medals that they won. And I could ask how many gold medals. I can get very elaborate with this. We'll kind of go through some of these functionalities here in a few moments. But check out what happens when I change what kind of question I'm asking. It also changes which workbook I'm querying. So I was previously querying my presidential election data or my election data, and now I'm bringing back information from my Olympic data. So very, very cool that it's able to figure out, based on my question, which workbook to be pulling back from. Now, as you can imagine, there could be potential problems there as well. So it's nice that it is able to switch workbooks very easily, but think about what would happen if you had two people that deployed very similar data sets, or maybe they even deployed data sets that were based off of the same data source with same column names, same table names, but they were using them differently. There could definitely be an issue there, and that's where you really want to have what's called a data steward that's part of your organization, or at least someone that uses the role of a data steward to determine what's accessible to your users. So I don't want to provide multiple models that are basically doing the same thing to my Power BI site. I want to make it so that we have basically almost like one version of the truth, like you would do in data warehousing. So be very careful of that. The Power BI site actually has a role called a data steward, and that data steward's role, let me show you this very quickly here. That data steward's role is to make sure that there is no confusion between your different data sets. So like I mentioned, the Power BI site actually has a role called a data steward, and you can see that if you look at the Power BI site in Admin Center. I'm not going to dive too much in the Admin Center, but I do want to show you that it does have this one role called a data steward, which allows you to differentiate who can deploy what, and it almost like initiates a workflow of who can see what and who can actually provide different permissions or different data sets. So you can see here I have a data steward group. Right now there's nobody in it because I have everyone as an admin in my site. That data steward is going to be very, very important to be able to determine what everyone can see and what is accessible on the organization site or on a department site, for example. Okay. All right, so we saw briefly there that we can ask questions of Q&A and it'll return back results, and then it changes workbooks based off of what we asked it. The first example I showed here was show political parties. Oop, let me actually type it all the way in. Show political parties. And by asking show political parties, it gives me a list. So if I say show, it'll oftentimes give me a list of values here. So if I ask here, instead of show political parties, if I say something like show number of candidates, it'll return back an aggregate value where I asked for a specific number. I said show me the number of candidates, which it interprets as a count of the number of candidates. Again, it's still pulling from the election data workbook, but it's brought back an aggregate showing me the count of candidates that I may want to bring back. Okay, so keep that in mind. Just depending on how you ask the question, it's going to return back different values. It's all think almost like your English class, your 5th grade English class, where you learned about predicates and nouns and pronouns and things like that. Those are actually really important when it comes to Q&A and how you ask the questions itself. All right, so I asked for show number of candidates. It brought back an aggregate of how many candidates I have. If I ask something like number of votes by year, it'll bring back, traditionally, it'll bring back the number of votes by year. But check out a problem that I have here. Check out what's going on here. If you look at the result that was brought back, it's bringing back what it thinks is correct, but notice I have a problem here. And I'm sure you guys probably look at this and can imagine what the problem is here, is year is a number inside my data set. And because year is a number inside my data set, it's trying to aggregate year. So this is a summed up version of my year. This is what's called as an implicit measure inside of Power Pivot, where it's implicitly aggregating this value incorrectly rather than showing me a year for every one of my popular vote or my votes here. So you have to be very careful with how you design your Power Pivot model, because check this out. You'll notice over here, if I change the results rather than pulling from the election data, so let me zoom in over here. So right now I'm pulling from the election data, but if I ask the same exact question of a different workbook, like I asked it for Power BI Q&A example, if I asked it of this one, the same exact question, notice that I've optimized this model to have a distinct value for each of my years. So each of my years are no longer being aggregated. It's actually displaying the years and the amount of total votes. You'll also notice that it assumed, based on the question that I asked, that it wanted to visualize this in something like a bar chart. Now you have a lot of flexibility here. If I don't like bar charts, if I think that this makes sense more to be like a line chart because it's a trending value, then you can certainly come over here in the far right and I can change this rather than looking at it as a line chart, or a bar chart I mean, to change it to a line chart where I can actually see the total popular vote growing across time here. So really interesting things you can do and play around with the data in how you ask it and how you display it. Now I'm going to show you how to fix this problem that we had a few moments ago. You notice the problem that we had here was with my election data. My election data workbook had total popular vote in years both aggregated up. It was showing me a total aggregated value for each of those values. So here's how you fix this problem. This is all about how you design your Power Pivot model. All right? So this is the Power Pivot model that this is based off of. You can see here it's called election data in the very top. And what I want to do is make sure that the Power Pivot model understands not to implicitly aggregate year. This is what happens inside Power Pivot. If it sees a number column, it assumes that you want to aggregate it. And oftentimes it's incorrect. In this case, for year, it's incorrect. If I had something like month number of year, so a list of month numbers, that would also be incorrect. I wouldn't want to aggregate that. Quarter would likely do that. So there's a lot of different circumstances. There's some other circumstances in there as well that I probably don't want to aggregate. All right, so to fix this problem, let me show you how to fix this. I'm going to go to Power Pivot and hit Manage. And this is going to take me to my Power Pivot workbook. It's a very basic Power Pivot workbook. You can see there's not a whole lot of tables in here. There's a whole 5 tables in here. I've already created some calculations, but I've left a lot of problems in here intentionally. I wanted to leave some problems in here intentionally so I could show you how to fix my model and optimize it for Q&A. So the first thing that we want to optimize is fixing year. You see my year column over here. I'm going to go back to my data view here. Again, if you're learning Power Pivot still, I recommend you watch a couple of our recordings. We actually had a webinar yesterday on building Power Pivot models, and some of this was discussed there as well. But I need to fix a problem on my year table, and I'm trying to fix a problem where my year is actually aggregating. I don't want year to be able to summarize. I want it to show a distinct value for each one of my years. All right, I'm fine with leaving it as a whole number, so you can see my data type up top here is a whole number. That's fine. It doesn't need to change the data type, although that could help me solve the problem as well. I could change it to a string, and then I would no longer have that problem. But really the right way to fix this problem is to go under my Advanced tab inside Power Pivot. And under the Advanced tab on Power Pivot, which really it has a lot of non-advanced features here, so that's not really a very advanced functionality here. But I'm going to select my year column under the Advanced tab, and I'll find a property here called Summarize By. All right, now what this property right now is saying to do is summarize by default. So by default, it's going to summarize based on the data type. So if it sees that my data type is a numeric value, then it's going to assume that I want to summarize and aggregate those values up, which again is incorrect in this scenario. So rather than aggregating, what I really prefer to do here is do not summarize. I don't want to summarize year. It doesn't make sense to summarize year. There's no real business case here for summarizing year or quarter or month number. So I'm going to select my year column, go to Summarize By, and change it to Do Not Summarize. And then the next time I deploy this back out to my Power Pivot or my Power BI site, it will be fixed. It will be corrected. And the result will look more like this one that we saw a few moments ago. So it will show me a distinct list of all my years and then the number of votes by year. More of what we would expect to see here. Okay? All right. Now, there's some other things we can do here as well. So that's one fix that you would want to do to make sure that your model is optimized for Q&A is look at your data types and make sure things are aggregating appropriately. And if they're not, you may need to change that Summarize By property that I just showed you on the Advanced tab of Power Pivot. Some of the other things you may do as well have to do with data type, not just data types, but data categories. So check out this. If I asked it something like and I'm going to flip back, I'm going to stay on this Power Q&A example here. If I asked it for something like the total votes by state, it's going to bring back, it's going to ask me, hey, can I reach out to the internet to do a map? Yes, that's fine. It's going to reach out based on the way that I asked the question here. I asked for total votes by state, states being the keyword here. When it noticed I asked for state, it interpreted that as me wanting to see the data in a map. Now this, again, has a lot to do with how we design our Power Pivot model. state, my column inside my Power Pivot model that's actually called state code, has a data category of geography. And based on that data category, it realizes whenever someone brings back that column, the default visualization for it should be a map. Okay, and we're actually seeing here you can interact with this map. I can go look at certain states, hover on top of them, see how many total votes I've had in each of the states. Okay, so a couple interesting things here to point out. One being the data category of my state column. Let me show you what's going on here with that state column. So I'm going to flip back over to Power Pivot and show you how did this know to make it into a map. Why didn't it just put it into a table, which again I could make it do. It was smart enough to realize when I asked this question that I wanted to see it in a map. Okay, so let's take a look at that. I'm going to go back over to Power Pivot. Okay, I'm going to find my state column here, our state table, and then my state column. And you'll see I have a column here called state. Now, when I select the state column, under the Advanced tab again, okay, so it's again under the Advanced tab, but again, I wouldn't really consider this a very advanced functionality here that we're doing. But I'll go to the Advanced tab, and under this Advanced tab, you'll see there's a property here called Data Category. Right now, this data category was actually suggested by Power Pivot. So Power Pivot sometimes is smart enough to look at the type of data that's in a column, and the column name as well, and realize that it really is a certain data category. Now, it doesn't always do this, though. Depending on how you've named the column and the actual data inside the column, it may incorrectly either not categorize it at all, or it may categorize it incorrectly. So when you're creating a Power Pivot model, you really want to go look under the Advanced tab at the data category to ensure that my state column is really being brought through with the correct data category. You can see state code here and state name are both being brought through correctly. Now, if I select region here, so check out if I select region. If I click on region, it wasn't able to recognize that as a proper data category, which is normal. It normally doesn't. And it brought this through as an uncategorized column. Now, if I wanted to categorize it, if this was something that I could actually geopolitically categorize and map, I could pull down my data category and tell it what kind of category I want to be able to make this. You see some default ones listed here: continent, city, address, country, region. There's definitely some of them available here, but if I don't see one that I want to use, you can see there's a more categories option here, and then you can go actually search through different data categories that are available to you. So there's a lot of different ones. In fact, you can even make custom ones here as well. Okay, but once I set up a data category, for example, on state, I've told it that it is a state or province. Once I've set that up, then my Power Pivot and Q&A model, my Q&A query will actually bring back that data into a map like we saw here, and the user didn't have to do anything to make that happen. All they asked was show me total votes by state, and it brought back the results in a map. Okay. All right. So that's data category. Okay. Now you can also get pretty specific with these queries or these questions that you're asking. So for example, if I wanted to get more specific, like I said, show me total number of votes for Democratic and Republican parties by state. Okay. Notice there, as soon as I added that by state, it realized that I wanted to show this in a map. And it's actually showing me two maps, one here for my Democratic Party and one here for my Republican Party. So I can see total votes by state. Of course, I'm showing this of all time, so I probably want to add a time element into this as well. I'm not going to do that right now, but just know you can. I'll do that in a second. But I can see here very quickly that I'm able to create some multiple visualizations by getting a very specific query. You can almost think of this, if you're more of a techie person, of this is like me entering in a where clause, where I said select number of votes from election data where Democratic and Republican Party. And then I did a group by on state. So you can almost see how this and visualize how this would be done in T-SQL, but it's being done inside of a natural query language here. Now, you'll even notice here, whenever I added in the by state, it turned it into a map. Before I added that by state, it simply brought it back as a bar chart, which you can see here over time. The Democratic and Republican Party are pretty even overall. But as soon as I add that by state, it then shows it in a map view here. Now, the other thing that we can do here as well is I can add in multiple predicates or multiple where clauses in here. So right now I'm saying show me this by state. I can also say, all right, let's see the total number of votes for Democratic and Republican parties by states in 2008. So I can get very specific here and say, all right, show me a particular year And when I do that, you may have noticed very quickly, it actually ran the query very quickly, that it did change my results in my map. You can see here in California in 2008, Republicans had about a little over 5 million votes. Democrats in Democrats in 2008 had about 8 million votes. And this is for a presidential election. So really neat what you can do in here. And the user is just asking simple questions. So show me total number of votes for Democratic and Republican Party. I didn't have to add the word party, but I could have, by state in 2008. So really, really cool here. All right. So this just shows you how you can easily do filtering. You don't need to know how to write queries to do filtering. You can simply type it in as a question here. You can also ask just simple questions. So if I wanted to see things like show parties, it interprets this, me asking for show parties, as show political parties. All right. Now this is the next thing I want to show you. How does it know that's what I mean? I have a column inside my table called political parties, but how does it know that's really what I'm asking for? I'm just simply saying show parties, and it realizes that I really want to show political parties. Now this is also another neat feature that's part of Power Pivot, and you may not have this feature. This feature I'm about to show you is an Office 365 only feature. Okay. And by the way, if you ask Microsoft, when is all this stuff coming on-premise? The answer consistently is that they are planning to have it added on-premise, but everything's gonna go cloud first. So everything's gonna happen in cloud first because they can be very swift with updating and making changes. But then we will push it to on-premise. Okay, that's the traditional answer Microsoft will give you on these kind of things. If that's what if that's what you have in your mind, is this is great stuff, but I can't do it. Is it will come. All right, so I said show parties, and somehow it interpreted show parties as show political parties. How did it know to do that? I didn't tell it that political parties means parties. It just was able to figure that out. Now this is done through something that's called synonyms. And I mentioned synonyms in the slides earlier, and I'm going to actually show this to you now. This is a feature, like I mentioned, that is only available in the Office 365 version of Excel. All right, so let me go show you what this looks like. I'm going to go back over to my Power Pivot workbook, back in Excel, okay? And back inside of Excel here, I'm going to go find a column, or really anything I want, that I want to create a synonym for. Okay, so check this out. If I go to my election results table, for example, or even let's do political parties here, okay? You'll notice I have a column here called party name, but I don't have anything called parties. So how was it smart enough to interpret party name as parties? Well, the way that it does that, like I mentioned, is through synonyms. So if I select that column, or even just select this table, and go to the Advanced tab again, okay, so this is under the Advanced tab inside Power Pivot, and then under the Advanced tab, you'll see there's a functionality or a feature here that I have that you may not have. This is Office 365 only, okay? And basically what this is doing is I'm going to create synonyms for each of my tables and my column names to make it easier for Q&A. The whole purpose of the synonyms feature is for Q&A, to make it easier to find what you want. All right, so I'm going to select synonyms, and it's going to bring me back to the diagram view of my Power Pivot model. And it's also going to allow me to see each of these tables, and you'll actually notice the key piece of this is on the far right. I have a new synonyms pane over here. What this is going to allow me to do is find my political party table, come over to the synonyms tab here on the far right, okay, and then start giving different aliases for my column names, or different ways that people will ask for a column. So for example, you see here party name. I could, for party name, say that they may also type in party. They may also type in parties. And you can just kind of keep creating a comma-separated list of possible things they would ask. They're not always going to type in the word party name, so I'm going to type in synonyms of what they may type in to make it a little easier for them to find what they want. You can also do that for the table itself. So I would call the table here, give it some kind of synonym as well if I wanted to. Okay? So you can do it at a table level, you can do it at a column level, you can also do it on calculations. So if I look at my election results table here, you'll see if I click, as you click on the tables, it creates and fills in a new synonyms pane over here. And if I scroll down, you'll see I have several columns in here that have to do with votes. So none of them here are called votes, though. So if I ask for total votes by state, it has no way of bringing that back right now because I don't have any column called votes. I have one here called total popular vote. I have one called total possible electoral vote, total electoral votes won, but nothing that's simply called votes. So if I wanted to return back the total votes, I could do that by finding a column that I feel fits that need. One here, for example, called total popular vote. And I could just give a synonym here called votes. Okay? And I could call this one, let's do this one here. Let's call this one electoral votes. Okay? And then this way, as people type in their question, by the way, it's not case sensitive, so you can do all lowercase or all uppercase, whatever you want. It'll interpret that correctly. But I can type in those synonyms here, and then that way, when I redeploy this out to my Power BI site, my users will easily be able to get back the results they would expect just based on what they type, because someone is more likely to ask for votes rather than total popular vote. So once I redeploy that model out, I should get results back. Okay? So very, very cool that it's able to do that, interpret that. So keep that in mind. That's done through something called synonyms. Synonyms are going to be your friend when it comes to Q&A and being able to select tables and columns and give synonyms of ways that people will ask questions. Okay? All right. By the way, this is a very new feature, so there's going to be a lot of new and neat things that come with this. Not a whole lot I can talk about right now, but there's a lot of new things coming with this. There's a whole team devoted to this that's working hard on making it better. It's already pretty good. All right, so I got a few more things I'm going to show you here with Q&A. All right, so we got show political parties or show parties. I can also tell it that I want to show parties with greater than 5 candidates, just to show you some of the other kind of things that you can search in here. So actually, I want to see all of the parties that have more than 5 candidates. Because as you may see here, when I tell it to show parties, I get a big long list of all the political parties. There's the Communist Party in here, Concerns of People Party. There's a lot of weird ones in here, but if I want to see the top 5 parties, I can say show political parties. Oops. Show political parties, or parties, with greater than 5 candidates. And it's able to do that search, that basically greater than, that you would traditionally do in T-SQL, to return back results for me. I can also do a between. So if I want to say show parties with greater than 5 candidates and less than 10 candidates, I can certainly do that as well. So you can do some range searches here or range filters very easily. Okay, there we go. All right, so here it shows me all of the political parties that have between 5 and 10 candidates. You'll notice Republican and Democrats is now eliminated because they have many more than that. But these are all kind of my fringe, had some kind of support in the past, like the Whig and the Socialist, Labor, none identified, American Party, Socialist Party. Can't believe we had 9 socialist candidates here. It's able to do that all on its own. I didn't have to do anything special inside Power Pivot to make that happen. It was just a count of the candidates that I had by political party. Now, what this tells you, though, is that your relationships are incredibly important, because the only way that I was able to answer this question from Power Pivot is based on the relationships that I have in my model. The relationship between each of my tables here is key. If I have a bunch of tables that have no relationship, or no relationships between them, there would be no way for it to be able to navigate through the relationships. So the question I just asked a moment ago was about political parties and candidates. It had to go from political party through the election results to candidate to get the account of the candidates by political party. That just tells you that the relationships you have here are incredibly important. That it was only able to do that through those relationships I have. And it may even be wrong, so keep this in mind. You may get some false positives here because it's having a jump through my election results table. So if I had a candidate that was part of a party but never got any votes, then they may not be counted. So keep that in mind. It just depends on your relationships. In my case here, I actually have, even if they didn't get any votes, I still have them listed. So mine is pretty accurate in this case. It's just all about how you bring the data in. All right, so that's the other thing I want to point out is relationships are key here. They're very, very, very important. And it's going to allow you to really have some flexibility there. Now, the other neat things that Q&A has with the last few minutes that we have here is I was actually surprised I could fill an hour with Q&A because it's intentionally a very easy tool to show. But there's the last couple of things I want to show you here is I already showed you have the ability to change the visualization. So right now we're looking at this as a bar chart. I could change this very easily to a table. I could change it to a line chart if it made sense, a scatter chart. You have some flexibility to change things here very, very easily through the visualization here. And basically this visualization that we're seeing here is Power View. There will be a Power View session later this week. It may even be tomorrow, I'm not sure. But that Power View session will walk you through how to create visualizations like this on your own without having to use Q&A. But this is using Power View to be able to show that data. You'll also notice the other things that are available over here is field filters. So you'll notice it interpreted my question into a filter that you see right here. And it also allows you to change what's being showed. So you see here there's a fields option. And right now this is all of the things I have available inside my Power Pivot model. So if I didn't like what my question produced, so my question produced these results, I could come underneath fields and actually change what I wanted to visualize. So rather than visualizing a count of candidates, I could come in here and say, all right, not only do I want to see a count of candidates, I also want to see the total popular vote. And I can easily change that out here. Okay? All right. Very, very cool. All right, so here's the next thing, very last thing I want to show you. You can change the visualization. That's nice. The last thing I want to show you is that you can create something called a featured question. And basically what a featured question is, Melissa, let me know if my audio is cutting out. It's telling me on my end that it is, but I don't see anybody complaining about it. The last thing I want to show you is
You're
called
still
featured
okay.
questions. Okay, and what featured questions is just another way. Okay, great. It's another way to make it easier for your users to find the data they care about. All right. Now, you may have users that even using something like this is too complicated. You know, hopefully not. Hopefully they know how to use a search engine or are comfortable searching on Bing. That's because that's basically what they're doing here. I'm searching on Bing, not really Bing, but it's searching through Q&A to find information about my data. All right. So that's great. That's great that I can do that. But I want to be able to create some questions, pre-canned questions that are already answered and ready to go for some of my users. All right. So for example, if I wanted to see something like the total votes by political party or just by party, okay, I could get this nice graph here that shows me total popular vote by party. That's great. I love it. But I want to make this as a featured question. I want to make this very easy for my users to be able to find. So I can create what's called a featured question, and I'm actually doing something on my other screen here to kind of prepare for this and get something where I can show you that's really neat. But what I want to do is I want to be able to get this as a featured question. Now, what that does for my users is it gives them these little tiles that you see here. So these tiles are featured questions that people have asked in the past, and they've saved them as featured questions so people can get to them more easily. Now, if I want to create a featured question, I can simply hit this little plus sign here, or if I'm in the middle of the little search like we were showing earlier, let's say popular votes by party, okay? If I'm in the middle of doing a search, I can always come over here on the very far right where it says about this data, and under about this data, I can then tell it that I want to create a featured question. Okay, so you have a couple places you can do it, where I had the plus sign, or you can come over here on the far right. So I'm going to copy my question I've asked so far. I'm going to copy this out. Make sure I copy it. And I'm going to hit the little expand button here to pop out this about my data section. You'll see here I can go to other featured questions, or I can hit this add a featured question. I'll paste in my question I asked earlier. Okay. I can tell it how large or small I want to make the tile. Remember I showed you the tile just a moment ago? The tiles are your featured questions that you've saved. I'll make it a large one. I can tell it what color I want the background to be. Okay, whatever you want it to be. And I can also apply a different little icon. So you have some flexibility on the kind of icon that's displayed on the tile. Or, even better, if I have an image that I want to show on the tile, like so, I just paste it in. So I just went and I found an image on the web. I found a picture of Abraham Lincoln from, you guessed it, Wikipedia, or Wikimedia here. Wikipedia, really. I took a picture from Wikipedia. I just copied and pasted it, pasted in the URL for that image, and now when I hit save, this is going to provide a featured question on my Power BI site for popular votes by party. And I can change it here if I want. I can delete it if I want. But what this allows my users to do is rather than typing in questions, they can simply hit popular votes by party, the featured question, and it takes them to my question I already created. It makes it very, very easy for them to be able to get going with Q&A. It also helps them understand how to explore Q&A, okay? So it's very, very neat. Very, very cool things coming with Q&A here. And again, like I said, this is a very new feature. You're going to get a lot of new things that come as well, okay? Now, the last thing I want to show you guys, just back to my slide deck here for a moment, as I mentioned, this is part of Office 365. So a lot of questions will come, all right, well, how do I get going with Office 365? There's certainly trials you can do. If you want to explore this stuff, you can definitely do trials. I normally don't like to talk about pricing because I don't work for Microsoft, but they've made pricing on this very public and easy to find, okay? So if you're running all Office on-prem right now, you're in the far right category. That far right category is I wanted to be able to do Power BI, but I don't have Office 365 right now. Okay, so if I want to be able to do Power BI and Q&A and Power BI site stuff that I just showed you, you would be in that far right category. And keep in mind, this is replacing Office. You're replacing your traditional Office that you have right now with basically like a subscription-based model for Office, where you're going to pay however much a month, the $52 a month, and then you get all of Office. You get the entire Office suite, which, by the way, your users can install on 5 different machines for free. So if they have multiple devices, they can install it on 5 separate machines, all for free, included in the subscription. They also get mobile BI. They get Power BI sites. You get SharePoint. So if you don't have SharePoint, SharePoint's part of it as well. So you get SharePoint Online. There's a lot of neat things that come with it. Now, if you're already an Office 365 customer, but you're not doing SharePoint Online and you want to do Power BI, then you're in the middle category. So middle category is I already have Office. I already have Office do Office 365, and I just want to do Power BI, and I need SharePoint as well. You're in that middle category. Okay. Then the far left category is I just want the Power BI features. I already have the other components. Okay. Keep in mind you have to have the other components to do this as well. I have to have SharePoint Online, but assuming I already have SharePoint Online, the Power BI feature is just $20 a month. Okay. Again, I am no Microsoft salesperson, just want to kind of put out what's already public. This stuff is publicly out there, so I wouldn't come to me with licensing or pricing questions. But that's something you would approach your Microsoft rep as far as pricing out. And when you guys redo agreements for Office and just infrastructure in general, you definitely want to explore Office 365. It's cloud, and it's a great way to do cloud. It's a great way to get your first exposure in the cloud because it's just Office. It's traditional Office, but in the cloud here. So I get more updates more frequently than you. I got synonyms. You don't. I'm kind of rubbing it in your face there. Just kidding. But there's definitely some new things that you're going to get that you wouldn't have with traditional Office. I don't want to have to wait every 4 to 6 years, depending on when you redo agreements with Microsoft, to get a new version of Office. I can get it immediately. Every single time there's an update, I get it. I don't have to wait. Okay? You will never be behind the curve on Office stuff anymore. All right. I know a lot of companies are probably still running Office 2003, 2007. Hopefully not a whole lot of 2003s. I'm sure there's some out there. But this is a way to keep you up to date at all times. All right. So I'll kind of wrap it up on that. Melissa, if you want to tee up some questions here, my contact information is on the screen right now. So you can email me at dknight@privatenetworks.com. I also tweet a lot about Power BI. That's primarily what I communicate about, and Twitter's a great way. Even if you don't, not a big social media person, if you want to find out when this stuff is coming out and new things that are happening, there's definitely some particular people you want to follow, and if you do Twitter, follow me. I always tweet kind of the latest stuff that's coming out with Power BI, and I also blog about it as well. You can find my blog right there at devinknightsql.com. All right, Melissa, that was great. So what questions do you have up?
Okay, this one says, can I upload an Excel file to the Power BI site, which is data connected to an SSAS source locally hosted?
Great. Yeah, great question. So you can. So first of all, yeah, short answer, yes. Here's what you do. All right. So the question here really is, if I dive a little bit deeper into it, is I have an on-premise data source. I have an analysis services data source that's on a server at my office or in my data center. Okay. And I want to be able to connect that basically to the cloud. So the question I'm interpreting as, correct me if I'm wrong, is I have data in the cloud, I have data on site, and I want to be able to put it in this cloud environment. And I also want to be able to do things like data refreshes and all that kind of thing. You can certainly do that. The way that you do that, which I haven't shown here today, is something called a data management gateway. And what the data management gateway allows you to do is connect on-premise data sources, like you've described right there, an analysis services data source that's on-site or on a data center, and I want to connect that to my Power BI site. So that way I can do data refreshes in the cloud, but from an on-premise data source. It's called a data management gateway, and that allows you to create a connection that is on-premise to the cloud. Okay? And it's actually they've actually made it super easy to configure. Basically, just briefly here, I'm not going to dive into the details of that, but basically what you do is you go on your on-premise server and you download the data management gateway software, and it creates that connection that allows you to connect it up to Power BI.
Okay, this next question says, if I have Office 365 and I have on-premise SharePoint 2013 enabled with BI powered by SQL 2012 with integrated SSRS, will Q&A function?
Okay, so short answer is no. You have to have the SharePoint online. So it sounds like you have Office 365, more of the desktop stuff. So you got Excel, PowerPoint, Word, all that. You have Office 365, which is great. You got a good start. But to be able to do the Q&A stuff, you have to have SharePoint Online and Power BI. So you're missing those two components, which were, if I go back to my previous slide, you would be in the category of the middle guy. You're in the this guy right here. Okay, you already have all this stuff. You've already taken care of that. You just need this and above. Okay.
Okay, and the next question says, if you create a pivot chart or Power View, can QA show that chart when a user searches something relevant to the chart?
Great question. That's one I haven't had yet. So again, short answer is no. So it's always going to, Q&A is always going to pull back from Power View. The output is always Power View. So you type in a question, it's always going to pull back from a Power View report that's generated on the fly. It's not going to pull back from pre-created reports. That's actually a nice feature request for Microsoft. I might pass that one along. I'll steal that from you. But yeah, it does not allow you to do that right now. It's basically kind of creating reports on the fly through Power View. Which I think that's actually a great feature request to provide to them, is I have a canned report that I would like to show. Unfortunately, right now it does not do that.
Okay, and Tim says, can I have more than one instance of the same synonym pointing back to multiple Power Pivot fields?
Okay, so so I could have had, I guess earlier I showed political parties, or parties. Could I have put parties on multiple fields? You can, yeah. And what it will do is you can set a default field that it shows. So inside Power Pivot, let me pull this up real quick. Inside Power Pivot, there is a property, again under the Advanced tab here, called Default Field Set, where you can give it the default field that you want to show. So if you do multiple synonyms, I wouldn't suggest that, by the way, but you can. You can give multiple synonyms for, or I'm sorry, one synonym for multiple columns. You can do that. But in that case, you would probably want to set up this default field set so it knows which is the one that you want to defaultly show.
Okay, and this question says, can everyone use sitespowerbi.com to upload the worksheet?
It depends on how you set up security. So this is actually more of a security question. Is can anybody upload to there? No, it's determined by who you give permission. And then also what comes into play there is the data steward role. So I mentioned data steward earlier. That data steward is who's going to be in control of what is visualized to the entire company on that Power BI site. So the scenario here is I have someone that's attempting to deploy to my Power BI site. It kicks off a workflow, or you can set it up to do this. It kicks off a workflow so that my data steward has to either approve or deny that workbook that was deployed. So that way, and this is actually a really nice feature, because that way I don't have 10 different people looking at either a similar workbook or maybe even the exact same workbook, all deploying multiple versions of it to my Power BI site. The data steward is kind of in charge of approving or denying which of these workbooks are on the site. Now, data steward doesn't have to be a techie. It could be a subject matter expert, but it's a role that you assign. I showed that briefly in the admin center.
Okay, and let's go ahead and take one more question, and this one says, can QA be based on SSAS multi-cubes and an uploaded Power Pivot embedded data source? Please give best guess.
Okay, they can, yeah. So if I use, the way we have to do it right now is I would have to take an analysis services data source and use it inside Power Pivot. So right now this is the only way to do it, is take a analysis services data source, put that data from an AS into Power Pivot, and then I can use that as a data source. So it has, right now, it has to feed its way through Power Pivot at some point.